And joining us now to provide some more perspective on these numbers is Marist College pollster Lee Miringoff. Lee, thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure, Liz.
So in these numbers, I don't see a lot of big surprises. It's pretty, not surprising. Andrew Cuomo very looked upon very favorably, but his job approval rating not so much, but he hasn't done anything. So, he's been around for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think, as you correctly identified, like on the favorability, people like him. So that builds some foundation for him for the rest of at least the present period. In terms of his job approval rating, he's doing better than recent governors did at the first Marist poll, with the exception of his father. He's about the same. But in terms of Patterson, Spitzer, and Pataki, Andrew Cuomo's numbers are superior to each of those early on in their administration. So I think that's one thing that's interesting. So he has established some political capital already. The other thing in these numbers I think that was quite interesting was that his support, both in terms of the favorability question and in terms of his job performance, really is across the board.
Right.
It's regionally, upstate, suburbs, New York City. It's Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We hear so much about all the polarization going on in our politics. Andrew Cuomo, for New York voters at this point, is a unifying, not a polarizing figure.
So what's interesting about these in particular, when you get into the numbers, is that Andrew Cuomo, when you talk about his support across the board, is actually really supported quite favorably, actually, by the Tea Partiers, by people who self-identify as Tea Partiers. 58% say they have a favorable opinion of him, and 58% say they identify with the statement that he's a good leader.
That's correct. I think that's part of this across-the-board appeal, and the fact that he's not polarizing, that people really are convinced at this point that New York needs someone who's going to be tough on the fiscal side of the ledger. Certainly that's compatible with where the Tea Party voters are, but it's also where New Yorkers as a whole are on this question. People understand that the picture out of Albany has not been a good one, that they understand that the economy itself is hurting, and they think that there's a need for major changes. We've seen that all along. That's still the case. What's changed here is that more people now than before think the state's headed in the right direction. Only 18% in October thought that. 42% think we're now headed in the right direction. A majority still think we're not, but there's been a big change in those numbers that Cuomo has ushered in with his starting to be governor.
Yeah,
so it's an interesting picture.
This center of the road approach, this triangulation, of course, is something that Bill Clinton was famous for. We saw also Barack Obama do it in the State of the Union address. It's sort of all the rage. And you see Andrew Cuomo doing it as well, which is pretty interesting.
Well, the middle is where that's where the voters are.
Right.
And a majority of voters think that Andrew Cuomo's a moderate. That includes Democrats, Republicans, and independents. A majority of each think that to be the case.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he really has the center right now.
Yeah, the problem is that the majority of voters might be in the center from an ideological standpoint, but when it comes time to actually go to the voting booth, those people in the center don't usually drive the vote.
Well, but that's, as you say, is nothing he has to worry about right now. I think the key thing is where his approval rating is. And right now he has built up some significant political capital. We'll see what happens in this budget process. Look, he ran for office promising that this was going to be a tough time budgetarily, and the fiscal situation needed to make some tough decisions. Now he's in the process of doing that. The question is whether that kind of credibility is strong enough. Do people trust him? Do they have confidence in him? Certainly when we look at where he stands up against the Assembly and the Senate, it's night and day. He may not be polarizing along party lines right now with the electorate, but there's a big gap between where he is and where the State Senate and the State Assembly are held. 18%, 17% approval ratings for the legislative chambers. Not a pretty picture. So he's got some leverage there. He's got some support from the voters outside statewide, and clearly he has a sense of how to do the inside strategy as well.
But you
It'd be very interesting to see how it unfolds.
You think, Lee, that it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that his numbers are going to go down. I mean, when this budget fight is joined, and it's really going to be joined just a few days from now, we will be getting those numbers and seeing what they look like on Tuesday. Then the battle begins in earnest. At this point, we've been skirmishing. There's some people throwing a few grenades, and he's throwing a few grenades back, but everyone's in their foxholes. They're all going to come out onto the battlefield, and his numbers have got to go down.
Not necessarily. I mean, again, it depends whether people think he's got the right temperament and the right approach for the state. I don't think there's a built-in guarantee that his numbers are not going to erode. Now, if we're talking a year from now and the economy is still in big trouble and the budget picture is still in big trouble, I'm not sure voters are going to be willing to give him a lot of time. But certainly, he has the kind of support right now where they think he's a good leader, they think he cares about the voters of the state, they think he represents all regions of the state, and they think, a majority do, that he's fulfilling campaign promises. So right now he's got the building blocks around which, the foundation around which to launch that kind of budget battle, and particularly because the opposite side in the chamber, legislative chamber, the Assembly and State Senate, are held in such low esteem. So he's got some leverage. The question is whether he can pull it off. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion his numbers are necessarily going to drop.
Okay, let's talk briefly about the other two statewide elected officials that are in this poll, the state controller and the attorney general. Eric Schneiderman, of course, a former senator, just 34%, both of them actually, job approval rating at just 34%. Is the problem for both of these guys that people still don't know who they are?
Absolutely. They both have a large number of people who, for whom the jury is still out. If the numbers for Cuomo are 19%, it's not surprising that Schneiderman and DiNapoli are going to have even larger numbers in terms of people not willing at this point to have a sense of what they're all about. Schneiderman may be more understandable. He's new. For DiNapoli, look, if you're state controller, unless something bad happens, parentheses, Alan Hevesy, you just don't get that well known. It's tough to kind of connect and punch through in the position of controller. That's not DiNapoli's fault. That's an age-old story in New York.
Right, but I mean, he did just run state. Both of these guys just ran statewide. You would think that people would have a little bit more of a clue about who they are. I mean, you're talking about 31% have never heard of Eric Schneiderman, and 23% have never heard of Tom DiNapoli. That's a significant number.
Not heard enough to assess their job performance.
Form an opinion, right.
Yeah, so in Cuomo's case, the number's 19, so maybe that makes a little sense that for a controller and the attorney general, that would be a larger number. We'll see. The Cuomo number, undoubtedly, in terms of the people who say they don't know enough about him to form that opinion, that number is going to go down. The question is, does he sort of buy those up? Does he become more popular because there's fewer people are undecided and he's won them over? I mean, I think that's going to be the test for him, certainly in the next 2 or 3 months as his budget battle brews.
Well, we've got actually some more numbers coming out soon from you, and we'll be revisiting them. But the real question is what this translates in terms of his popularity, how that translates into support for his agenda, and then if that will be, he'll be able to, as he has been trying to, marshal support of the people to help him in the fight.
With these regional state-of-the-state forums that he's been holding, exactly. And the question is, he's trying to bridge the gap between the campaign, the running for office, and the governing. His father used to talk about the poetry of running and the prose of governing, and that there was a difference between the two. I think Andrew Cuomo is trying to merge the two and not make that distinction that his father had made when he was governor.
Yes. Well, we'll be revisiting this with you. I want to thank you. In the meantime, Lee Miringoff, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Liv. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks for your patience.